Hello, and welcome to Recapping with Delora
and Ashley.
Please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Recapping Podcast.
Also, rate, review, and subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast platform. We're on all the things.
We want to hear your thoughts on the movies and shows we review.
Leave us a comment on Apple Podcasts or our YouTube channel, and we will read them during the show.
Or reach out to us on social media. We love talking all things entertainment and pop culture with you.
Thank you guys so much for listening.
Thank you.
Delora, how are you today?
I'm doing all right. You know, this is a hard topic for me sometimes.
I think for me, it is joy and sorrow because we get a chance to celebrate and appreciate the artistry and life and voice of the voice, Whitney Houston, today. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, y'all know we mess with Whitney Houston. I had to think about what my favorite Whitney Houston song is as I was watching this movie and as I was getting prepared for this recap. Do you have a favorite Whitney Houston song that you can point to as like, out of all her hits, that's the one?
I want to dance with somebody.
Fitting. My favorite is also from the original era of her first two albums, and that is How Will I Know, Baby?
Oh, that's a close second. Oh, I love that one so much.
Love that song.
How will I know?
Love that video.
You know, one of my favorite Whitney Houston videos is I'm Your Baby Tonight.
Even Saving All My Love. I mean, it's such a nostalgia, and The Greatest Love of All, because my mom has a VHS of those Whitney Houston videos of that time. And I used to watch it so much as a kid growing up. And so like those videos just mean so much to me. And then The Greatest Love of All, I sang like preschool, kindergarten, graduation. Like it was just such an era for me. And I was like, you know what? I don't think I stood a chance with who my favorite singer was going to be as a kid. Cause I was just so inundated with Whitney and with her music during that time when I was a kid that I just don't think anybody else stood a chance. Between her and Michael Jackson, it was just rough.
Surprisingly, my mom didn't listen to a lot of Whitney, but Whitney was so around, there was no way of avoiding her.
Exactly.
Right? And so for me, I didn't realize that I loved her as much as I did because, again, my mom's favorite artist was Michael Jackson. So that was front and center. But then it's like by the time you get to The Bodyguard and you get to Waiting to Exhale and The Preacher's Wife, I'm like, oh no, I know Whitney pretty well.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it was rough. It's hard to compare to those two at that time. They were so like out of this world with their success and with their talent. But, you know, Whitney Houston for me is the greatest vocalist of all time, and listening and having an opportunity to talk about this movie, I got choked up. I'm going to try not to cry on this recap because I got choked up my first time watching this movie. I got choked up rewatching the movie because it is something to like relive some of these major moments she had. Even, you know, filming of The Bodyguard, which y'all know is my favorite movie from when we recapped it, all of it. So,
and we don't talk enough about her song with Enrique Iglesias either. Do you know what song I'm talking about?
It's not ringing a bell or a fave of mine. So
this was during the 2000s, Could I Kiss You Forever? And she has one of the most show-stopping riffs. Like she was the feature, but she took it over, and it's a moment.
Of course she did.
It's a moment. You have to hear it.
I was saying before we had started this afternoon to my mom that I really do think Whitney Houston is like what I imagine the angels sound like in heaven. Like she just has that voice to me that is just so, like, I was like, yeah, God needs you back. He was like, listen, she's been gone a little bit too long. I need her back. need that voice again, because that's how powerful it was to me. So anyway, let me not get emotional. Our recap for today, guys, is Whitney Houston. I Want to Dance with Somebody. I didn't even realize this was released theatrically on my birthday last year.
Oh, your birthday?
December 23rd. Okay. And it has been available for streaming since April 22nd. It is 2.5-hour runtime, just about. And summary is a celebration of the life and music of the one and only Whitney Elizabeth Houston, one of the greatest singers of all time, tracking her journey to musical superstardom. This is directed by Kathy Lemons. Cast Naomi Aki as Whitney, which I just learned today that she had false teeth in to portray Whitney.
Because she has a gap in real life.
I saw it because I saw her and is it Nefesi, who plays Robin, do Ailes' usual song association. And that's when I saw her without it for the first time. I was like, oh, wow. And it helps her definitely embody Whitney more, seeing her in full, right? So as I mentioned, Nefesi Williams plays Robin Crawford. Stanley Tucci, who we love, is Clive Davis. Tamara Tooney is Cissy Houston. Ashton Sanders is Bobby Brown. Clark Peters is John Houston. Bria Danielle Singleton is Bobby Christina. Reviews. Rotten Tomatoes, 44% critic score, but 92% audience score. And 67% of Google users gave this film a thumbs up. Delora, what is your grade for I Want to Dance with Somebody?
All right. So this one was kind of difficult because it's like one of those biopics with really bad wigs. You know what I mean? It's like, is this on par with the Jackson 5 Dreams? Like with, you know what I mean? Like, you know how biopics are, like they're either What's Love Got to Do with It or, Jackson 5, The American Dream. Like I kind of,
I mean, you had Angela Bassett though.
I
don't want you. I don't want you. I don't want you.
She's actually a both. Range. And don't get me wrong, the American Dream one, it's good, but it's not like, it's no Ray. Like, you know what I mean? And so
Bohemian Rhapsody, there's a list of the ones that people consider to be top tier.
And so this grade is because I feel like we still haven't gotten that level for Whitney, like in terms of biopics, in terms of it, like Ray. And it gets a C for me. Like, I needed a little bit more meat and potatoes. It's a lot of singing. It's like, is this a concert film? Yes. Because it kind of felt like it.
Yes, it was.
So, and obviously those parts were fantastic, right? But it was also interesting because it's like, because we grew up with her, I'm like, I remember these moments.
Exactly.
I remember these moments. And again, Whitney is always a hard topic for me because it's just so heartbreaking. But that's why we focus on her life, right? What she brought to this world in her time with us. So what about you?
It's a B+ for me. It's a B+ because as I mentioned, when I mentioned this as a hidden gem, I really do think that Naomi captured this essence of Whitney, particularly like this nature that she had to kind of stand up for herself and hold her own, particularly in some of those iconic interviews we know her from over the years, and how she kind of always said her piece, still respectfully, but in a very Whitney way. And then also, to your point, the music. I mean, that is what I love Whitney Houston for, and to get to experience them, even to your point, though I've lived through and seen many of those performances, particularly the national anthem, multiple times. That for me at first was the biggest reason why I didn't really gravitate or want to watch this movie, because I thought no one's going to be able to do this justice, right? I've seen the real Whitney. How can anyone else compare? But it did bring me such a sense of like nostalgia and just warmed my heart to see some of these things again and relive some of these moments again, but from a different lens of at least getting a little bit more detail, because there are things throughout this film that added context to things that I didn't know about, particularly because Whitney Houston, though she's my favorite musical artist, I don't know her as well as I know some of the artists today, because that just wasn't the era of revealing everything about oneself.
Mystique. It was very big on Mystique. Being the superstar, the movie star, the singer, and not knowing much about their personal life.
And there was a lot that was put on Whitney in terms of her public image that was not necessarily capturing who she actually was. And there's been so much that has come out since she's passed away, even her relationship with Robin, that I didn't know about when I was growing up and during her time alive. So because of those things, I think I still got a richness from the story that I needed. But to your point, I think that because this story is done in collaboration with her estate and in collaboration with Clive, we weren't going to get the rawness that we may get in the future by somebody who is going to look at this from a different lens and perhaps focus on one period of time.
Well, that and them having the access to all of her vocal performances that were, you know, in the actual movie. So,
and it's Whitney Houston as the voice. It's hard not to. Even the idea of them talking about whether or not they were going to just strictly use Whitney's singing or use some from Naomi, because Naomi can sing as well. They did this blend where Naomi sang a little bit live, a little bit, but there's nobody who can replicate that voice. So for all of those reasons, it is a B+ for me. So let's get into it. We begin the story in Whitney's hometown in New Jersey, 1983, singing in the church choir. Quickly get to see the dynamic between her and Miss Sissy Houston, because Sissy is trying to teach Whitney the correct, quote unquote, way to sing, because Whitney has expressed that she wants to be a professional singer. Obviously runs in the family, right?
Yes.
Could you
Sissy
imagine?
Knows what you're talking about.
She did. Can you imagine having gone to church with Whitney Houston and Sissy Houston?
I feel like Black people probably live through that more often than not. In terms of,
don't get me wrong, we have great vocalists most of the time in choir.
Amazing vocalists.
But this is Whitney. That's like, imagine going to church with Aretha Franklin. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Pinch worthy. And hopefully they understood who they had in their midst, for sure.
Man, I would have been catching some type of spirit every Sunday and if they have been in the choir.
And again, known church girl, right? I also grew up in Detroit, Motown, a lot of the gospel scene. We got the Clark sisters. Like, shout out to Kiki. She just announced her pregnancy. I've met her multiple times in person. Like, you know what I mean? It's like,
you had some singing.
In your backyard.
You had some singing. Yeah, that's a good point. You growing up in Detroit, you had some singing. Again, I've gone to church with some great vocalists and people who really blew me away when they stepped onto that church choir. But Whitney Houston would have done it for me. I would have been in there losing my mind if I got a chance to experience it. I mean, the preacher's wife gave us a taste, right?
Her rendition of Joy to the World,
yes,
still gives me goosebumps.
Yes, absolutely. Whitney meets Robin Crawford while she's still in high school and mentions that the bar is set too high for her dreams of being a professional, with Sissy, with Dionne Warwick being her cousin, and Aretha Franklin essentially being her godmother. She was currently singing backup for her mom. Can you imagine a voice? You have a voice like Whitney Houston's and you still feel the bar was set too high?
Her godmother is Aretha Franklin. She was the #1 voice of Rolling Stones, even though that list. But yeah, you know what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm. I get it. Success, like even there's a Dionne Warwick biopic film on like HBO Max or something like that. One can forget the level of success
Dionne has.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, it would have been not just because it's not just about talent, right? It's also, you see plenty of people that are very, very talented, but how do you get to that next level?
Yes. Yes.
But Whitney's talent was just I mean, for me, undeniable, but I get it.
I do feel like she brought in the era of the pretty singer in some ways, right? Because, you know, specifically talking about the Black community, Black music, if you could sing, you could sing. And it didn't matter what size you were, as long as you could blow. But then, like, we were entering the 80s and things became more visual. You have MTV and you have this model-esque woman who can blow. And then in my mind, chronologically, you got, okay, so then there's Whitney, then there's Mariah, then there's Aaliyah and Beyonce. Like, you know what I mean?
Janet.
Aaliyah, not necessarily the voice, or Janet, but still, you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yes. You feel like she helped usher in an era of being more image conscious. Yes. I mean, one could say you still had, people like
Diana Ross.
Yes. Took the words right out of my mouth.
Tina Turner.
You still had beautiful. I think that one of the things about Whitney, though, as we see in this film, and I've even heard talk about subsequently, was she was one of the first people that I feel like her image was crafted for her. It was not necessarily who she felt like she really was, and the way she necessarily would have chosen to be portrayed. Like, I read that John Huston, her dad, wanted her to be Barbie, like Black Barbie, essentially, even though that's not necessarily who she really, really was, right?
Right.
And so that for sure followed a lot of, like, in my opinion, women who went into pop thereafter. So I can definitely see it from that perspective. And Mariah had her whole journey with her marriage and all of that.
Like singers, I would put Whitney, Mariah, and then like Beyonce. Because, like, yes, we can talk about Diana and Tina and Aaliyah and Janet, but they're not vocalists.
They're not vocalists. I am really happy that in this film, they didn't exclude or shy away from that relationship between Whitney and Robin, because, again, that had been something to me that had been contentious within her estate and her family over the years, of not wanting to be honest about the fact that that was not just some friendship, that it was also a romantic relationship at a point in time. And it's part of Whitney's story that I was unaware of, even as a big fan, for a very, very long time. So I appreciated that they let that story unfold and didn't try to hide it. Clive's words after seeing Whitney sing for the first time were, I think I might have just heard the greatest voice of her generation. When she sang, I believe the children are our future. What'd you think about Sissy stepping aside to give Whitney that shine once she realized Clive was going to be in the audience?
I know they portrayed her as a strict mother, but I feel like she's kind of a representation of the type of woman of her era. Like, a lot of Black mamas didn't play, period, point blank, right? And if she's good at something, she's going to teach you and you're going to be the best. That's just how that cookie's going to crumble. And when she saw an opportunity for her daughter, I thought it was beautiful, because obviously she had been a singer, a background singer for many years. And she saw that opportunity for her daughter and essentially threw her out the nest. And I think it was beautiful.
I appreciated the portrayal that they gave of Sissy in this movie, because I do feel like there's been tales over the years that kind of made Sissy seem like a very domineering force in Whitney's life, slightly bullyish, if I'm being honest. And I think what this showed is, to your point, she was her mother, but she always had her best interest at heart. She was supportive and she wanted Whitney to realize her dreams and all of these things, even if at times that may have been possibly harsh to some people who witnessed it. To me, in my upbringing and the way I view it, she was being a mom. So I appreciated seeing some of that within the story and within this portrayal of Cissy Houston. When Whitney signed to Arista, her dad, John, negotiated a bit on contract terms. And they granted best efforts to take Whitney with Clive wherever it was that he should go. A first for an artist who he's worked with, apparently, based on this film. Do you think that this maneuvering and this change in dynamics helped to solidify the relationship that Clive had with Whitney throughout her career?
I think so. But I also think, luckily it was a healthy relationship, because that could have turned bad quickly. We've seen so many examples of bad management. I'm thinking about, take your pick, honestly. Ike and Tina Turner. I was even thinking about Viola Davis' character. What was her character?
In Ma Rainey's Black Bottom?
Ma Rainey, Black Bottom. So, yeah, I think it definitely solidified their relationship, but I was happy that it was a healthy one for both of them.
Absolutely. I also wondered if this helped change anything for artists that came thereafter, because watching the movie Air about Michael Jordan and that contract with Nike, I hadn't realized the barriers that Michael Jordan broke in that contract. So watching this, it just made me wonder, did this help with negotiations for any artists moving forward that may have been able to get, more than they would have previously because they weren't taken advantage of in the same way that artists that preceded them had. So I would have been a little more curious to hear about that if that were the case. But I do think that it was nice that it seemed like that they had a solid relationship, not just business relationship, but just relationship in general. And I always had that sense, but it's nice to see it in the film as well. I love the way they shot the making of Whitney's first album, between studio sessions and the video for How Will I Know that we just talked about is my favorite of her songs. Because to be honest, as an artist, I've never known how involved Whitney was throughout the creative process of her albums, because she wasn't a songwriter. And so I feel like there's been other artists over the years, like the Mariahs and even Beyonce, people like that, who I've seen in the studio, and I get a chance to see how they work, and I get a sense of them being really involved. And I never knew if Whitney did that beyond singing the tracks. So I feel like that was a little bit illuminating for me too. Like, oh, it really was a collaborative process with you helping to decide and pick your music. You weren't just this puppet that people were deciding and making decisions for you.
Yeah, I thought it was really shocking when I found out that Whitney didn't write her own music, though. But I think it was the assumption, right? Like, even with I Will Always Love You, I'm like, oh, Dolly Parton wrote that? Granted, I was young when I found it out, but still, it's like, huh. And it also made me realize that's okay too, right? Because it's like, you are the vocalist and these people write songs. And if you have the right contributor, y'all can make Diamond.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody's not a songwriter. I think songwriting is a part of the process, just like production. Like, you find great pairings and partnerships that help you to flourish in your artistry. And the way that it was portrayed, at least in the movie, Whitney did pick songs that spoke to her at particular times in her life. They even, had the scene where she originally passed on the one song, Why Does It Hurt So Bad? Which I love. Like, that song is so heartbreaking, but I love that song because when she was in her early 20s, she couldn't relate. But after she'd gone through some things with Bobby,
right,
now you have the life experience to be like, let me have that song again. Now I understand. So, like I said, I just appreciated getting a glimpse into her creative process and how that went, given that we never really got a chance to see any of that. And it also, Delora, struck me when watching this, just how young she really was achieving all of this success.
Yes. And, I hate to say it, but it also makes sense that it's easy to fall into behaviors that aren't healthy to cope with the meteoric rise that she was on. So
apparently, the Greatest Love of All tour was dubbed the Greatest Drugs of All tour by somebody behind the scenes because of the amount of drugs and excess that was going on by quite a few people, as well as Whitney, at that time. So that was something that I noted. They didn't really focus on her drug use till the second half of the film. And I was like, but wasn't she
They
supposedly doing
showed it a little
drugs?
bit when
There,
her parents were fighting.
a blip. That was you smoking some weed versus she was supposedly doing coke
Yeah.
in the early 80s. So I get why you want to not necessarily just focus on that immediately, but that was definitely something I noted. So I spoke a little bit about Whitney and Robin's relationship, and it got really complicated because they ended up moving in together. Whitney decided when she really started blowing up that she wanted Robin to join her team and be a creative assistant and director and all these things. And at the same time, on the personal side, things were taking a turn because her father basically said, I need you to start going out with some men. If you want her to be on this team, I'm going to need you to start going out with some guys. And so she has a fling with Jermaine Jackson, and to breaking that news to Robin did not go well. Robin about broke everything in the damn house. Do you think if you were Robin, you would have been able to stick by Whitney's side as her friend and as an employee, given their relationship?
I don't know. And I say that because I don't know what it's like to be in a homosexual relationship in the 80s. Like, it's a lot different today
Tough.
than it was in the past. I remember growing up because, as a kid, I loved the Today Show. I remember the conversation of quote unquote gay marriage being a hot topic and them interviewing couples and talking about like, seeing loved ones in hospitals and being on insurance and things like that. So I say all that to say, some people made that decision through the years, knowing that their lover has attained a beard, so to speak, for image purposes. And it actually reminds me a bit of a spoiler alert of the popular novel, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Her husbands were pretty much beards. And I say all that to say, I don't know. I don't know what I would be able to tolerate or not.
I think that's fair. I think that's so valid to mention the fact that obviously this is a different era. Now, there is quite a bit going on these days, especially politically, that makes one feel like we're being dragged back in time. Mm-hmm. So it's not that there aren't issues and threats still that exist today, but for sure at that time, one could have a different understanding of what it must be like to be in love with someone, want to be with them, but understand that society and the circumstances prohibits you from being with them. So how can I still have them in my life? For me personally, I think it would have been a struggle though, because I would have at least needed time separation to resolve my feelings and my love before I can move into just a friend role. Like to just go cold turkey and be like, but I'm still going to stick beside you. And I'm still going to do everything I need to do and deal with the fact that you're with these men. And because that's the thing, Whitney didn't have beards. Whitney was living her best life.
She was
with these
with
men.
Them. Yeah.
She enjoyed a little time with Jermaine. She enjoyed some time. They didn't mention it in this film, but she enjoyed some time with Eddie Murphy.
Yeah.
When she meets true. Bobby, she falls in love. So I think for me, I think it would have been tough, but I can understand for sure the circumstances being what they were, that Robin was most likely trying to make the best of it. And I'm sure she did. I mean, had this unconditional love for somebody who was a great friend to you. So,
right.
As Whitney's success and star rises, so does criticism. The film did not shy away from the criticism Whitney faced in her career, including from some within the Black community who considered her a sellout and not making quote unquote Black music. What were your thoughts on this backlash she received during her career for supposedly not making Black music?
Yeah, it's crazy because we know her catalog now, but I was not aware of how much of a pushback she got. And now that we know that Clive is behind everything and created her persona and everything like that, it's like, well, if you got a white man making your image, you might not you might miss out on what your community may appreciate or, gravitate towards. But I think it was the focus of being quote unquote crossover, because we're also in an era of music where we're out of the Motown ages, right? Like Motown was like the big experiment on getting that crossover success. And, there have been some, again, mega superstars and Diana Ross and Tina Turner, but this is the next generation. And so who's that? Who's that? The voice, right? And Whitney was molded to be that. I do think a lot of her career, especially towards the end, she did a lot of like, I'm down. Look, I promise. Which she was, obviously, but
I think one of the reasons why it may have impacted her more too is because she was probably like, if I had more of a say, things may be a little bit different. Not to say that I didn't think she still, the answer she gave, especially during the one radio interview they highlighted, where she said, I don't know what white music is. I don't know what Black music is. I make music, right? Yeah, I sing. I'm real. A singer. Right. I think that's very valid. But at the same time, I do think there were things that she was rubbing up against that probably did make it more irritating for her to receive such feedback. Because she's like, I grew up in New Jersey. I grew up in a Black neighborhood and environment and Black church and all these things. How am I suddenly not Black enough for y'all?
Exactly.
And so.
And then, even today, we have this conversation, like, what is Black? We are not a monolith. We are individuals. We are, stop painting us with these broad strokes that the media has, brainwashed us to believe what Black is.
Yeah, these debates still rage on today, though. So it's not like she's the last artist to have to experience this. But I, to your point, did not realize she received this criticism either, because she's always been beloved by me, right? So had no idea. It was illuminating, but I thought she handled it very authentically when it came up in the film. One of the aspects of the movie I did not care for, and I'm so sorry to this man, but the casting of Bobby Brown. He and Whitney infamously met at the 1989 Soul Train Awards, where Whitney received boos from the audience. Again, going back to the criticism she was receiving. I think the reason why this portrayal of Bobby did not sit well with me is because I loved Woody McClain, who has previously portrayed Bobby in the New Edition story, in the Bobby Brown story. And I just felt like there was a charisma that he had that I just did not necessarily see in this particular portrayal. And they eliminated her relationship with Eddie Murphy, which I thought was interesting because he was kind of that in-between person who reportedly even told her not to marry Bobby, right? So I kind of wanted to see a little bit of that tension. I'm not gonna lie.
I was surprised by that omission too.
Yeah.
But I feel like, yes, I understand what you mean in terms of the charisma between the two Bobbies. But for this story, I think Bobby was just a side character and they wanted to like maintain that. Like, you know what I mean?
That's a good point, because he has had these other vehicles that have been more about him. And so you don't want him to necessarily overshadow the story of her. But Bobby's never overshadowed Whitney for me. So, I don't think having someone who matched a little bit more of his energy, at least on that Soul Train Awards performance, I think that set it off wrong for me. Maybe if I had seen him just in his seat first, it would have been like, okay, let me adapt to this. But when you put him on stage, you need to bring out Bobby, or I don't know what we're doing here. Like, that's probably just wasn't the best intro for me. But also, if they had put Eddie in this, and even Robin having an issue, couldn't blame them if things went down even remotely how it was portrayed, with him proposing to Whitney in one breath and then dropping the bombshell that he had gotten his ex-girlfriend pregnant at the same time.
Insanity.
Now there's speculation about how that really went down. Supposedly it actually happened via a phone call and there was some backstage altercation and all this and that. But it's like, red flag on the play. You know what I'm saying? Like, Let's have a conversation. Let's discuss this, Whitney. Let's discuss.
I never liked Bobby with Whitney. Never. So yeah, there's that.
The scene of Whitney Houston singing the national anthem at the Super Bowl was one of these scenes I cried on both watches. I have rewatched this actual performance so many times, and it always gives me chills. It is legendary. Did this or any particular point make you more emotional or nostalgic when you caught it in the movie?
So for this particular movie, I wasn't necessarily emotional in terms of like any particular spot. I think if anything, I was kind of just somber throughout the whole thing, especially when we get towards the latter part of her life. And so if anything, when it came to her performances, I was just happy because I'm like, oh, they're using her recordings. Like that was a relief, you know what I mean? And I'm like, of course it's going to be legendary.
Powerful.
But part of that is part of my criticism of this too, because it's like, are we playing the entire performance for every performance, or are we going to do a snippet and then go to the next, part in life? Because there were moments where I'm like, oh, okay, this is we're doing the whole thing here.
Well, I think it's tough too because we know Whitney so well. Like one of the things I loved about Selena and I still love that movie to this day.
True.
Is that we had so much of that because I didn't know who Selena was prior.
Interesting. I'm glad that you brought that up. But I do feel like it was definitely more longer performance in this one than Selena.
It may have been to a certain extent.
Because I only remember like 3 songs or 2. Beady Beady Bum Bum and Dreaming of You, and maybe one other one.
No, there was a lot of performances. Even the Texas performance in Houston where she was at the Astrodome and all of that. There was a lot of performance, but there was also a lot of information, family moments, times you got to see her as a kid growing up. Like it was a very comprehensive.
Well said. That's another
biopic.
Top tier bio.
Jennifer Lopez deserved that Golden Globe.
I mean, talk about an introduction,
She deserved that Golden Globe.
One of her top performances, easily.
So I think maybe one of the things too is this helps the next generation. Because again, we grew up with her. This may help the next generation to still appreciate her talent who may have not ever gotten a chance to see these performances. So I'll say that. But I never knew Whitney postponed her wedding to shoot The Bodyguard. Good call. That's all I have in my notes. Good call. Made a lot of sense. We get to the point about halfway through the film. Whitney and Bobby have married. Bobby Christina is born. And again, I'm like, okay, are we going to address this whole drug use situation? Because it's been here. But the drugs in the pen, which apparently is legit, was slick. Wow.
That was fascinating.
Slick. Apparently, since she's passed, there have been people who have come out and said, yep, I was her dealer, and yep, this is how we did it. So one of the biggest revelations, though, in this film is the complicated relationship between Whitney and her father. From the infidelity in his marriage to pushing Whitney, like I said, to see men over Robin, to running through her money. That hospital scene between Whitney and her dad before he passed away was heartbreaking.
It was gross.
What'd you think about their relationship?
I don't know, man. Like, I knew she had tension with her father. And so seeing it, this was the first time, we're getting, shed light from Whitney's estate on the matter. To me, it's gross and heartbreaking. I hate when money breaks up families. Like, you're on your deathbed and you are asking me for your cut of a negotiation that happened over 20 years ago.
And apparently really did sue for $100 million for breach of contract.
And then have the nerve to count her money. Talking about you and Bobby are hiding it. I am completely disgusted by stuff like that. And I hate again, that type of feuding towards the end of someone's life like that, it breaks my heart.
I
and
knew he
infuriates
was
me.
I knew he was trash when he started handing out credit cards to everybody in the office. I was like, oh no.
And like, who said that he could manage the money? Because he was a man? Like, I don't understand. The one of the first fights we see is him fighting his wife because she's out making money and not at home.
This again to me harkens back to her getting success at such a young age. She still had that parental dynamic with her, both her parents, but especially, her dad still looking at him as that father figure who should be making the decisions in her life, even though this is your success, this is your money. And unfortunately, even though he's your father, he's not someone you could trust. And that's heartbreaking. And it's something we've seen so many times with like celebrities and their parents. Yes. One can forget Drew Barrymore had to basically divorce her parents.
Yep.
One can forget about multiple children, stars over the years who have had to get away from their parents, get away from them taking their money because they were taken advantage of. And like I said, to me, it's heartbreaking because I think Whitney has such a close relationship with her family and such a trusting relationship with her family, and may have realized too late that she was being swindled for the money that she worked so hard for, having to go back out on a world tour because you're about to be broke.
This is why some people got 50-50 in their house. Know where the money is, where it's coming, where it's going. We are both making decisions on matters over X amount of dollars.
Like, and the fact that he had put everything in the business's name, like, oh, this is my jet. No, everything is in the business name. How do I not know that? How do I not know that? That really was upsetting. Her drug use goes off the rails. Clive tries to intervene. Robin tries to intervene, to no avail. She was finally forced into rehab for 4 months. This is where the movie kind of gets a little murky because they basically skip from that to 2009. Yes. But apparently Whitney went to rehab multiple times over the course of those years. One can forget the infamous 2002 Diane Sawyer interview that she did. One can forget about being Bobby Brown reality show. One can't probably forget about that one, but wasn't highlighted in this film. Those were sad, but illuminating years for me as a fan, because I can say that I was in heavy denial about her drug use for a very, very long time. Didn't want to believe it. And then even that performance celebrating Michael Jackson.
So skinny.
It was a scary era for me.
Yeah.
So I can understand, I guess, why they didn't highlight it, but at the same time, it kind of feels like glossing over.
Yeah. I just feel like it really started to hit home. And in some ways, I feel like I started mourning her talent when she lost her voice, right? Like,
absolutely.
It was one of those things where I don't think I really knew a singer who really could sing, who wasn't even able to like do the things they used to do due to abuse, addiction, and that was heartbreaking. Just to know, like in some ways it helps ground you in understanding like don't take your gifts for granted. You know what I mean?
For sure. And you saw that a bit with Clive, where he didn't even want her to be smoking, right? He's like, you smoking is like putting this classic piece of artwork out in the rain.
Yeah.
Let alone the levels of abuse that she would have had to suffer when she was in the throes of heavy, heavy, heavy addiction.
Right.
So I was the same as you. I mourned the loss of her talent so much. It broke my heart. Like, I think they have Clive say in the movie, like, doing something to deteriorate your voice is criminal. And it really was for me too, because I'm like, I have never, and I probably will never again hear a voice that does what yours does to me.
Well, and the thing about Whitney's talent that I think is worth mentioning is she was vocally brilliant, right? classically trained, but she was not afraid to go there. There are some people who have great gifts, but they don't have the tenacity to do what she did on some of those songs, like, reach for the highest notes, like, and that
It was
level of courageousness, we got a chance to benefit from it because it's like, it was just phenomenal.
it was very accurate when Clive in the movie called her vocally ambitious. I mean, there
Yes.
is no one else, like I said, that has ever moved me the way that Whitney Houston has moved me. It's incomparable. It's hard to even discuss. And so I think, to your point, it sets her apart from her peers and even from her predecessors, in my opinion.
Yes.
But when we do skip ahead and we see that return with that Oprah performance from 2009, do you remember watching that? Because I do.
I sure do. Of course I remember seeing that.
It was hard for me to watch at the time because the first thing I noticed was, this may sound weird to everybody else, but Whitney always had a very distinct like tongue movement when she sang. And that was the first thing I noticed, was that her tongue was different. I know that may sound so weird, but I was like, her tongue is totally different. And then it was I know she's not hitting the notes. She's not. And so it was just like, I wanted her to be healthy. I wanted her to be happy. But I was like, what do you do when you're used to being at the top of your powers and people still have that expectation of you and you want to deliver and you can't? So I just wonder behind the scenes how much that was still affecting her, and something, an extra thing now she has to battle against. Her tragic passing in 2012 at the Beverly Hilton Hotel the night before the Grammys. I did not expect them to hold on that for as long as they did.
What do you mean hold on it? Like the buildup of the day? The
buildup of the day, of us seeing the arrival, of her having the scene at the bar with a fan, of the conversation with Bobby Christina, of the drug interaction, of all of that. Like, I expected it to be a blip. I didn't expect to kind of live in it a little bit. And that hurt. Like, I can't explain it, but that was one of the major things I would have changed about this movie. Don't drag this out to me. Make this a blip.
I feel like it was necessary, though, because it happened and people wonder what happened. You know what I mean? Like, what happened that day? I don't know, outside of her coming into town, being ready to perform, and,
But I don't feel like I got any resolve based on how they kind of portrayed it. And supposedly she wasn't even the one who went and got the drugs. She would have had someone go do that for her.
Right.
So my last question about this, though, is, do you recall getting the news about her passing away?
Of course. I was in Michigan at my parents' house because we were in town doing wedding planning. I got married in April that year, and we would make trips to Michigan, months leading up to the wedding. And we got the news, and I'm like, what? Whitney? And just to look at the age, 48 years old, that 48. Seems so young.
It is very young. It is. I can remember almost every major celebrity where I was and watching the coverage. I think I blocked this out. I could not tell you where I was, what I was doing, what I was thinking. Couldn't tell you. I think I blocked this one out.
I will also say that I don't think I've ever cried at her death, but if anything, I cried or get teary-eyed whenever I heard a song of hers. Like, I couldn't listen to Whitney songs for almost 3 years after her death without being emotionally just mournful over, because again, I was already mourning her talent, and to know that her addiction not only took her talent, but her life too. Yeah. It was just too much.
Yeah.
And I would have literally you be in the mall and you hear Whitney song. I'm like, whoop, I cannot right
Mm,
now.
mm, mm. I did watch the funeral coverage. I remember that. And I remember thinking that Kevin Costner had some really nice words to say.
He did.
And I remember kind of the hoopla over the family coming and Bobby and that situation and
I hate the
the
drama that's when someone passed. I'm like, y'all,
yeah.
really?
But
We got to worry about this too.
I think there's a chunk of it I kind of blocked out because it was something. So the finale of the film wraps with that incredible medley that Whitney performed at the American Music Awards in 1994 that they gave a glimpse of at the very beginning of the film. And I think that this was such a beautiful way to conclude and show that vocal musical legacy that we've chatted about during the course of this recap and that we love so much from her. Give me your final thoughts and if there was any key performances that you wish had been included that you didn't get a chance to see.
So overall, I do appreciate the fade into black and then going back to one of her most memorable performances. I did like that choice. That was a spectacular performance. I went ahead and watched it again in preparation for this recap. I wanted to see more of the producer, Whitney, the producer. She produced some of our favorite movies growing up.
She did.
Cinderella starring Brandy.
That
So
was a throwaway
influential.
line. It was a throwaway line about Cinderella.
I know.
Yeah.
And you have today's Ariel claiming Brandy being Cinderella was a big deal. You know what I mean? Whitney did that. Princess Diaries, like Cheetah Girls. Like I would have loved to see Sparkle. Waiting to Exhale. Didn't talk about that. So those are the things that I think I would have liked to have seen in this particular telling of her story of her life because she was multifaceted and extremely talented and obviously had an eye for what people wanted to watch. That's a gift in itself. Yeah, it was. I thought the young lady who played Whitney did a great job. She really I think I really like what she did with her hands because Whitney was very expressive.
During that South America concert, when you see her do the flourish and you see the handkerchief, I gasped the first time I watched it because I was like, yes, the handkerchief. Whitney always, you know what I'm saying? Like it was just such a thing of like, yes, even the details for me, the details.
Yes. I'm glad that they were able to tell this story, especially in light of all the other tellings that has happened in recent years that the family did not enjoy. I'm glad that they were able to tell the story.
The only thing that I'll add is I would have loved to see who they would have tried to cast as Denzel if they tried to do a scene from The Preacher's Wife. I would have been fascinated to see what they would have tried to do with that.
Hilarious.
But overall, I guess I'll say if this is the only biopic we ever get of the incredible life and talent of Whitney Houston, I think they did a really good job. And I'm glad that they were able to do something that, you know, Clive was happy with, the family was happy with, that still gave some layers and gave some, you know, justice to who this woman was, without shying away even from some of the, like I said, things that I know in the past have been sticking points for everybody. So if this is the one and only, I think they did a good job. I'm sorry that I did not go support this in theaters, actually, after finally watching it on Netflix, because they deserve it, even just for the fact that, you know, Cassie directing it and all of that. Like, I just think that this movie deserved its shine. So I'm glad it did well when it hit Netflix and when it hit streaming. And I hope that you guys, if you're listening and haven't seen it yet, that you do take a look at it and support it, because I do think it was well done. So those are my final thoughts as well, Delora. Thank you guys so much for sticking with us for this recap of one of our faves and the one and only Whitney Elizabeth Houston. So, Delora, what you got for Hidden Gems?
All right, Ashley. Well, My hidden gem this week isn't necessarily specific to like just one interview. It's every cast interview from the cast of Queen Charlotte on Netflix.
Every single interview.
Every single one, because right now I am so obsessed with these young people. I don't know what to do. And the chemistry between Corey and India is unreal to the point where it's like, am I shipping them for real life? Like, I know they say he has a girlfriend, but let me tell you, chemistry. And my favorite vehicle to watch a lot of these interviews is definitely YouTube. So it's one thing to do like the talk show circuit where you, of course, you see Kelly Clarkson and Jimmy Fallon and Kimball and Steve Colbert and all that. But it's something about these online interviews through a lot of these magazines like Teen Vogue, Netflix themselves. Well, I would say BuzzFeed, but we know how that's going. They are so much fun, and they have them doing ridiculous things like having Corey put on lipstick without a mirror, and them trying out teas. I love this cast so much because the show is phenomenal. And will we recap it? Of course we will. You know we will. Highly, highly recommend. Just simply put Queen Charlotte and just go down the rabbit hole like I've been doing since this show been out like for 2 weeks.
I so appreciate
disappointed.
I so appreciate the stars and people who are promoting are such good sports about all the shenanigans that they have to do during press tours. Yes. I'm like, there are some days you have to be like, I don't feel like doing this shit today. And you still got to pull it out, and you have to be charming and nice and all of that and go along with some of these shticks that you probably don't feel like it. I think that's kudos to y'all. Okay. Appreciate y'all for that. Consummate entertainers.
Absolutely. Again, and don't forget the UK versions of our popular magazines too. So like Teen Vogue UK. There was another one that was UK that I thought was just such a fun interview. Again, and can we talk about these covers? Like they are on the cover of Vogue Netherlands. I'm like, they look gorgeous. And again, chemistry. All right, Ashley. What's your hidden gem this week?
So my hidden gem is about another giant in the music industry, Tupac Shakur. This 5-episode series on Hulu called Dear Mama, directed by Alan Hughes, examines the relationship between Tupac and his mother, Afeni Shakur. I really just wrote down, this is so good. I had started it. I've rewatched some episodes a couple of times. I still have, I think, the last 2 to watch, but this is like, I need to absorb this content and this information, right? It's not one that you just put on and you're distracted in the background. There's so much information. It's so wonderful to me to see this spotlight on Afeni and see the amazing influence that she had on her son's life in a way that I don't feel like a lot of mothers have gotten credited for when it comes to big, celebrities and figures and in history. I had read that book that highlighted the mothers of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and James Baldwin. That. And I thought that was so beautiful because I think about how often I hear about people's fathers and the impact of people's fathers sometimes on these figures, but not necessarily their mothers. And Tupac was Afeni's son. Okay. And so I just feel like this series does such a great job of helping to understand how she also shaped history with her influence and her impact with the Black Panthers. And again, on her influence on him, because without her, there is no Tupac. And even again, as much as I've heard and seen about Tupac over the years, still so much information and knowledge that I'm gaining from this with first-person interviews from his friends, from his aunt, from people that were just around and involved during those times. You know, you even had Snoop who's on there. You have Jasmine Guy who's on there. You know, there's so much juice and meat that you get within these 5 episodes. So I just think it's so well done. And I think everybody needs to watch it. So That is my one hidden gem for this week, Dear Mama on Hulu. And that is it, Delora. That is it, guys, for our episode for this week. We appreciate you for sticking with us as always. We will be back on Thursday with yet another episode discussing what's going on in these pop culture streets. We love you. We appreciate you. Y'all stay safe out here and be blessed.
Be blessed, y'all. Bye.